International Women's Day is not until Thursday, but marchers took to the streets of Toronto today to demand change. A coalition of groups marked the 40th anniversary of International Women's Day in Toronto. The focus this year was liberation of all women.
I wanted to come here because people need to know that women are powerful. We're here. We're not going anywhere, and we want change everywhere.
Organizers say today's action was also intended to celebrate and lift up Muslim, Black, queer, and transgender women. The march ended at Nathan Phillips Square in solidarity with the rally calling for justice in the wake of the Tina Fontaine verdict.
Too many Indigenous women and girls have lost their lives just to be knocked under the rug. You know, Tina Fontaine was 15 years old, and I'm sure there's so many other Tina Fontaines that we just haven't heard about, and people, this needs to be brought to their attention.
This was the latest in a number of protests across Canada following the acquittal of the man accused of Fontaine's murder. Critics say the justice system failed the Winnipeg teen.
You're watching Global Toronto. This is Global News at 6.
In other news, thousands packed Nathan Phillips Square today for protests about a Manitoba court's decision in the case of Tina Fontaine. Raymond Cormier was found not guilty of the teen's murder, a decision that has angered many who feel the court system is stacked against them. Well, today's protests called on leaders and Canadians to come together and find a way forward for everyone. One of those in attendance was Andrea Horwath. It was one of several stops she made today just a few months before the provincial election. Earlier, the Ontario NDP leader joined the 40th annual Women's March. This year, organizers were working to honor women and trans women, celebrate victories, and strengthen women's resistance on Indigenous land. Horwath capped off the day at a nomination meeting where Suze Morrison won the NDP nomination for Toronto Centre.
Our candidate is going to be able to bring hope to the people of this riding that things can be different, that we can have an Ontario where people can have hope for the future, where we don't have to choose between bad and worse, between Liberals and Conservatives. That's what they'd like you to believe.
An election will be held in the province no later than June 7th.
This is CBC Saturday News.
Hundreds gathered today for the International Women's Day rally and march in Toronto. And this year, marchers are demanding justice for Tina Fontaine. She's the 15-year-old Indigenous teen who was murdered in Winnipeg in 2014. Natalie Nanowski has more from the rally.
Force for justice and love and solidarity and transformation.
Hundreds packed into an auditorium for the 40th anniversary of International Women's Day, calling for equality for all.
Over the years, the women's movement has become more and more inclusive as we look at all the aspects of life that are impinging on women, and Indigenous women in particular.
And this year, the focus is on Indigenous women. Fresh in everyone's mind, the verdict in the Tina Fontaine murder case and the failure of the justice system to find and convict her killer, sparking protests across the country.
We know that the justice system has failed Indigenous communities a number of times. Enough is enough. We need to have the courage to do better.
The International Women's Day March joined forces with another rally, calling for justice for Tina Fontaine.
This rally was organized by a young high school student. When she first put it together on Facebook, she thought she was only going to have a dozen or so people show up. Of course, that's not the case. There are hundreds and hundreds of people in the crowd.
The organizer says she felt compelled to create the event, being the same age as Fontaine was when she was killed.
That could have been me, that could have been one of my friends. She had so much potential to live a full life, and the Canadian government failed her, the people around her failed her.
A sentiment shared by these marchers. Natalie Nanowski, CBC News, Toronto.
It's billed as the biggest march in North America to celebrate International Women's Day. This year is a particularly meaningful event, as this is the 40th anniversary of IWD in Toronto. It began with speeches in the Oisey Auditorium on Bloor Street, and then hundreds marched down to Nathan Phillips Square.
We want to be a part of society. We are fighting for liberation of women, liberation from violence, the gender violence that we've been hearing about everywhere. It's got to stop. And we are on the streets today to say no more violence and no more hate.
There were wide-ranging messages here today, with people speaking out against racism, discrimination of disabled people, against discrimination of trans people and the LGBTQ community, and for the liberation and justice for Indigenous women, for affordable housing and daycare, and for a living wage of $15 an hour. A key message also called for justice for Tina Fontaine, the 15-year-old Winnipeg Indigenous girl who was found dead in 2014. The man accused of killing her was found not guilty last month.
As Tina was in the care of the Children's Aid Society, and what did they do with her? They stuck her in a motel, and there was nobody there to support her or help her. And that's really on Canada.
The whole issue around missing and murdered Indigenous women is central to one of the key purposes of International Women's Day, the fight for equality, stopping violence against women, and basically the Me Too movement that's really exploded in the past year and a half.
Today's march took place ahead of the official International Women's Day on March 8th. Organizers also say it's very important that sex education programs continue in schools so that boys and girls can develop a clear understanding from a young age of what consent means, which they believe is a key component of eliminating violence against women.